Good afternoon, whiskey fans. It's Friday, happy hour time, 5 o'clock on the East Coast, 10 o'clock in the evening in London, 2 o'clock in the Pacific time zone, and 4 o'clock in the Central time zone, where our guests are joining us from today. We'll get to them in just a second here. Hope you've had a good couple of days and a good week so far and are ready for a good, safe, and fun weekend. Hope you've got a dram poured, and don't forget that you can always submit your comments in the various chat forums on the platforms that you're watching on. If you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, go ahead and add your comments in. We'll be glad to take a look at them, maybe even ask a few questions on the air for our guests. If you're watching on Twitter, do not respond to the tweet with this video feed because we won't see it until after the show. Switch over to Periscope or YouTube or Facebook on the WhiskyCast Facebook page to join us and throw your comments in there. And that way we can see them because we would love to hear from you. A community is what this is all about. I want to bring in our guests today. We'll start with Gabrielle Pharms joining us from Austin.
Hi, everybody.
How you doing, Gabby?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me.
And Scott Brunow from the Scotch Test Dummies, one of the Scotch gods in Wichita, Kansas. How you doing, Scott?
Doing good, Mark. How are you? And everybody else in the chat, how's everybody doing?
We are all doing great right now. And before we get started, before we get to the conversation, I've been meaning to mention this on the webcast. We mentioned it briefly on Wednesday. But Scott, I want to talk to you about the fundraiser you're doing for our pal Brett Ferencz on Sunday, the Scotch Trooper. Tell us what's going on with this one. As we've reported on the show the last couple of weeks, Brett was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer a while back and is in treatment right now and doing well. But his family could use some help. When you're a freelancer, as we all know, and it's kind of hard to get the bills paid, especially when insurance probably isn't the greatest when you're freelancing. So tell us about this fundraiser you're doing on Sunday.
Well, yeah, and years back, we've known Brett for several years now and had him on, I think 3 times on our channel on different live streams. But yeah, just a few weeks ago, he announced that a couple months ago, he'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. There's more information on his GoFundMe page. Hopefully, they think they caught it fairly early. He's already in treatment for it and stuff. The GoFundMe was set up for him, and we decided we've done a couple of fundraisers in the past, and so we thought we need to do one for Brett. Well known, I think, in the whiskey world and especially the Instagram world. His pictures of Star Wars figures and whiskey, took off several years ago. Yeah, I think everybody has seen. You might not know who did it, but you've seen pictures of Star Wars figures and whiskey bottles. That's Brett,
and we're showing one right now too.
Yeah, but Bart and I got together and said, "Hey, we need to try to do a fundraiser for Brett and help his GoFundMe out." I reached out to several people. We've got auction items that we do. Now, this will be on YouTube. So what we do is we advertise what item is up for auction. Those people that are watching on YouTube in the comment section will bid, basically, and we give each item 5 to 10 minutes, let people bid. And once we end it and say an item sells for, someone bids $150, we require that person go right to GoFundMe, make the $150 donation, and then send us or forward us the email confirmation, basically, that shows, hey, I bid $150 and I paid $150. So we know that's a good sale. We've got a couple of items that we'll be selling ourselves from our collections. Not whiskey, but whiskey memorabilia, whiskey merchandise. One thing we do have is years ago, Brett was building lamps out of metal piping, galvanized piping, and whiskey bottles. And I don't know if you mind if I share my screen real quick.
Go ahead.
Yeah. We will be auctioning one of the items, and I've got a few pictures here. This is a lamp that Scotch Trooper Brett built. Several years ago when he really got started in building these lamps. And this Kalila bottle was from our 100th review, Bart and I's 100th review. Kalila 12 was also our first review. And when we come upon our 100th review, we said, hey, let's go back and re-review Kalila 12. This is that same bottle from that. I sent that to Brett and I said, hey, can you make us a lamp, with this bottle? And he did. So that's some of Scotch Trooper's handiwork there. We'll auction that off. I've got, let's see, let me get out of here now. We've got just a couple of pictures we have from the lovely Jennifer Wren. These were not for sale, but this is a Dalmore coffee table book for Richard Patterson's 50th anniversary that we will auction off with a very nice Dalmore serving set, 2 Glencairn Copitas, toppers, a dropper, and then a very nice, I believe, sterling silver tray, which is heavy duty.
Yeah.
I've got other items are coming in the mail hopefully get here today or tomorrow. Mark, you yourself, you've donated one of your prints from your gallery that we'll auction off.
Yeah, what we are going to do is anybody, the winning bidder can pick any of the prints from our Art of Whiskey gallery. There's a link for it on our website. Any print, any size, and we will have it made up especially for you and signed and numbered edition and send it off to the winning bidder, no matter where they are in the world.
I've got a nice cocktail set from Spirited Tracy, as well as an antique Glenfiddich bottle holder from Bill Thomas of Jack Rose that he donated. We've got ebooks of Rare Bird from Rare Bird 101 of his Wild Turkey book. It's Bourbon Night. Chad and Sarah have donated items and a private tasting. Yeah, American Spirit. That's it. I couldn't think of the name.
Matter of fact, I'm talking to David tomorrow for the show this weekend. So,
oh, good. Yep. He's donating. We'll announce it later, but a certain amount of donation will get a free ebook copy of that book. So that'll be good. Iron Root Republic has donated some merchandise and a private tour and tasting at their distillery. So we've got quite a bit. Yeah. And hopefully it goes good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And let's show everybody the link here. That's where Brett and his family, and Sunday, 1 p.m. Central Time. And there's the YouTube link right there. But if you just search on Scotch Trooper on YouTube, I'm sure it'll come up, or on Scotch Test Dummies as well, right? All right, Scott?
Yeah. Yes.
And so I want to make sure we get that out. We'll put that up again in a little bit here just to give everybody a chance to remember it. But let's move on and talk about what you guys have in your glasses right now, because we've gotten almost 10 minutes in and we haven't gotten that far. So let's go with you, Gabrielle. What do you got in your glass?
So I have Balcones because Texas, obviously. And this is their pot still bourbon. I love it. I'm a huge Balcones fan anyway. I like all of their expressions. There's really not one I like over the other. So, but tonight I'm in a bourbon mood. So here we are.
Absolutely. Scott, what do you got?
Well, second, I asked Gabrielle what she was drinking, and so I grabbed Balcones True Blue Cask-Strength. So a couple different bottles of Balcones, and I agree. I haven't had anything bad from Balcones. There's a lot of good stuff coming out of Texas, matter of fact. So I mentioned Iron Root Republic. They're doing good things. But now I will tell you, as far as Balcones, one really stood out to me and surprised me, and that's the Mirador.
Yes. Like that, same for me. Like I wrote about it recently, and I feel like it has like this floral flavor profile that I haven't really had with any of the other whiskeys here in Texas.
Yeah.
So, very different.
Yep.
And for the record, I've had a lot of Balcones in the last few weeks, but the folks at Firestone and Robertson in Fort Worth sent me some of their new experimental rye whiskey, 100% cask strength rye, 4 years, 5 months old at 63.07% ABV. So that's what I have in my glass. And
Nice.
raising it to the Scotch Trooper. Brett, I hope you're watching. If you're not, I hope you hear about this. We're all thinking of you, buddy, and keep fighting. Cancer sucks, dude, and we're all standing there with you.
Absolutely. Yep.
So what is it about Texas that really is making, we're seeing all sorts of good stuff coming out. Iron Republic, as you mentioned, Scott, they've won awards recently for a lot of their stuff.
Yeah.
Firestone and Robertson and Balcones. There's really good stuff coming out of there.
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of it, and I was just having this chat with another editor earlier today. Texas whiskey is not like anything else that you've ever tried because our climate is so different than everywhere else. So whereas you might get 4 seasons in Kentucky and Tennessee, we get 4 seasons in a day. So it definitely affects the complexity and the flavor profile, of course, and even the color. So it's great. I mean, even if I didn't live here, I definitely would still buy Texas whiskey.
The cool thing I've seen is with Balcones, that lineage malt whiskey that they came out with the combination of Scottish barley and Texas High Plains barley.
Yeah.
That was interesting. I don't know if you guys have had the chance to try it yet or not.
I haven't yet, but it definitely sounds like something I need to try. Stat.
We've had Scott on the show before, and Scott's love for whiskey and his history with Bart and the Dummies, as they're known, is well known. Gabrielle, tell us how you got started in bourbon, because I want to get to this article that you wrote for UpRocks last month about your experiences as a minority woman of color writing about bourbon. But tell me how you got to this point.
So, funny enough, I actually got my start in fashion and music journalism. And I noticed the correlation between whiskey and music tied in together, because when you go to shows, they're usually sponsored by a brand, or even if you go to a fashion show, they're sponsored by a spirit brand. So long story short, about 3 years ago, Emily Saladino was the editor at VinePair, and I had went to a whiskey tasting. It was Whiskies of the World, actually. They tour around the country, and I believe it's international, but this particular one was in Houston. And I went and I noticed that most of the brands featured were all Texas whiskeys. So I immediately thought, okay, I really haven't seen any articles that speak to Texas whiskey in particular. So let me pitch a story that talks about the next boom that will occur. And sure enough, it was spot on. So I landed the assignment, and I haven't looked back since. I've been covering whiskey and even tequila and other spirits as well.
And I think I've had the chance to read a lot of your stuff over the last couple of months, and I think I love your work, because you bring a perspective that a lot of us don't have. Not only because of largely because you're out of Texas, and a lot of the whiskey writers I know are either based in the New York area or out on the West Coast. So we get this perspective from East Coast, West Coast, and you bring it from a whole Texas perspective that's really unique, as well as being a writer of color. And tell me about this UpRocks article, first of all, because you had some controversy a little bit about this, at least when this came out, because you started going to a conversational place where a lot of people really didn't want to go.
Yeah. I don't know if I really wanted to go there either, but it just happened that way. And I went with it, just sharing my truth and what I really feel like is the case. I even feel like it's my experience. So this story basically begins when I first started covering whiskey about 4 years ago. The press trips I would go on, and even some of the whiskey tastings I would attend in different states, I noticed that I was either always the only female, and not only the only female, but also the only woman of color. So that stood out to me. And then just in general, with the way that whiskey is marketed, I noticed that it's usually older white men. So it is what it is. And I know that I'm not the only one that's a female woman of color that drinks and enjoys bourbon. I mean, look at Fawn Weaver that started Uncle Nearest. I mean, I'm jumping probably ahead, but she's CEO and founder of that. And then she has her head blender, Victoria Edie Butler, who is the first Black female blender as well in the industry. So I just know that it's more than just me.
And she's been joined, and we should note, by Ebony Major, who's now the head blender for Bullet Bourbon.
Yeah.
And we're hoping, I've been trying to get Ebony on the show for several months now, because the one event that she did before the pandemic started and we all got locked down in early March was in New York City at the beginning of March. And that's when I had this longstanding agreement, as a lot of folks know, to be in New Zealand for Dramfest in Christchurch, and the schedules didn't work out. And I'd said, I want to talk to her when I get back. As soon as we got back, everybody went into lockdown and it didn't work out. But just to let everybody know, she's doing interviews again, or at least the folks at Diageo's PR department are making her available again. We are working on a time. I want to get her on WhiskyCast, because that's a great story to tell too. And she has a good story, but we did have Victoria on from last February, right before the lockdowns, because I was in Seattle for the World Whiskey Forum, and she just happened to be at an Uncle Nearest tasting in Seattle the night the World Whiskey Forum ended. So I showed up there and we sat down for about 20 minutes, had a great conversation, and you can hear that on WhiskyCast as well in the archives. But very cool lady.
Yeah, I think what I really find fascinating about Victoria's story, and Fawn too, they both, and I relate to that because I didn't come straight from a spirits industry background. And Victoria, she was an analytical manager for the government and then transitioned into this role at Uncle Nearest. So that to me it's just mind blowing. It just says a lot about her character, because it took a lot of humility to learn from others that knew more about distilling and whiskey, obviously whiskey in general, and for her to get that critique and that feedback and to apply it says a lot about her character.
And we did have some folks asking if they could donate stuff to the auction. Is it too late if somebody wanted to make a donation for the auction and donate something for you to auction off? Scott, could you still work it in?
It's hard to tell. I addressed Greg's comment up there earlier, but he was in the UK and only wanted to ship to the UK. So, I mean, that adds some complications, and it might be too late to try to get some of that in. Maybe. I don't know.
Because you can always do like I'm going to do and have them. I'm going to ship it from here to the winners. So we could do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Depending on what it is. So, Greg, if you want more information, or anybody that's watching, shoot me an email. Scotch Test Dummies @gmail.com, and we'll sort it out.
We have a fun question from Graham Fraser here for you, Gabrielle. Wanted to know if you've had the chance to get into single malt scotches yet at all.
You know, I have not. Shame on me. Like, I'm open to suggestions, but my go-to is bourbon and then rye second. So no, I haven't. Can't say I have.
And but you have done American single malts. I know you've done some stuff with Westward.
Well, with Westward, completely. I'm like, my mind's all over the place. But yeah, with Westward, I've covered their whiskey, but doing roundups and just overall, I haven't really ventured outside of them.
Well, we can work with you on that. We can help you find a single malt Scotch.
You know, it's kind of amazing how many people, though, really, I mean, a lot of people do get into all kinds of whiskeys. When Bart and I started doing reviews, we were just Scotch. And we branched out that we were like, well, we're in the States. And this was 6-7 years ago. We've got all these bourbons around us. They're cheaper than Scotch is. We should start reviewing these bourbons as well. Mm-hmm. So we got into bourbons. Of course, now, I mean, we've done Japanese whiskey, Irish whiskeys, Australian whiskeys, Taiwan, whiskeys from all around the world. I mean, there's good stuff out there from everywhere. But I mean, there's some people that do drink all whiskeys and enjoy them. There's some people, their palates just don't, either they're like a Scotch person only and they don't like bourbons, or, you know, they're bourbon only and their palate doesn't pick up Scotch, you know, so it kind of depends on the person. Maybe the intro as well. What do you try to get you in there? I recommend Macallan 12 a lot, just to bourbon drinkers for a first Scotch to try to move them into.
Okay, I'm going to try that, because I I've heard of Macallan 12, but in terms of trying it and experiencing whether or not I'd like it, haven't so much. And Scotch, I just can't do Scotch. I think I haven't had one that I really just am in love with. That's why, like you mentioned with the palates, I think bourbon and rye are just my main thing.
I think you can get so much more flavor out of bourbons and ryes just, from using that barrel for that first time, and especially Texas whiskeys, the flavor that gets packed into those things.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal compared. Scotland likes to age their whiskeys slower and over time and not have quite as much impact, from the wood that quick. So, and I think that's the difference is a lot of times Scotch just doesn't have really that flavor punch that bourbon and rye bring.
Yeah.
A comment from Crumpler who suggests, Gabrielle, you might want to start with Glendronach 12-year-old as a bourbon fan. That's always a good recommendation. And Duncan Gray points out that in all fairness, bourbons are a better value for the money. And he suggests also maybe a Macallan double cask 12-year-old or the Glenmorangie original.
Yeah.
Those are all good suggestions.
Oh, good. I definitely
We've got whiskey bars in Austin for crying out loud. So
yeah.
Well, like I said, 5 or 6 years ago when we started doing bourbons, and it was because they were cheaper than Scotch. Well, that's almost not the case anymore. You almost pay more for bourbons than you do Scotch. I mean, it's really bourbon. The interest in bourbons over the last 5 to 6 years has just increased dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
And Dom Roscoe is joining us. Good afternoon, guys. Enjoying the chat, but can't stay for long. That's a shame, Dom. If you wanted to join in, would be glad to have you, but too bad you can't stick around long. And then Greg Unrow says Redbreast 12 would also be an option, but of course that is an Irish whiskey, not a single malt Scotch. But have you had the chance to try many Irish whiskeys, Gabrielle?
Let me think. Have I had any Irish whiskeys? No, I haven't. Not any, and if I have, it doesn't stand out. Like no.
We need to get you up here when the time's right. Next time you come to Philadelphia area, you need to come over and hang out here in the Bat Cave, and we can open some bottles. And
that would be great. I'm going to take you up on that.
Count on it, because this stuff's not going to drink itself, frankly. And
yeah, I would love that.
But how did you get into bourbons in the first place? Because as you pointed out in the lead into that first paragraph of that UpRocks story, no Appletini's for me. I was that girl that drank bourbon neat.
Yes. So when I was about, I'm 33 now, so 10 years ago at this point. So I was like 23, 24 maybe. I was introduced to bourbon by a friend who lived in Europe. And interestingly, I soon gravitated to whiskey sours as a cocktail option to go to, or old fashioned. But I end up preferring to just drink bourbon neat as opposed to having it as a mixer. So that, and then my dad and my grandfather actually, and I mentioned that in my UpRocks article as well, they introduced it to me. They would drink it to celebrate positive moments and just to be in a good mood, celebrate a good mood. So that was my introduction to bourbon. I would say my grandfather, my dad, and then my friend from Europe.
What did your grandfather and your dad say when you became a writer about bourbon and started writing about this stuff?
My dad is so happy because he feels like he can benefit from it. Like, I sent him a sample of one of the whiskeys I was just sent, and he's ecstatic. And then my grandfather unfortunately passed, but I know he would definitely get a kick out of me covering this. My grandmother, she actually said, she was like, "Oh, your grandfather would love that you're talking about whiskey," because he always chuckled that was my spirit of choice. He just thought that he found that so fascinating.
I love it. I've told the story about my grandmother being a Southern Baptist Sunday school teacher who wouldn't go near alcohol if her life depended on it. And the comment was, my aunt made the comment a few years ago. She goes, "You know, your grandmother would not be happy with what you're doing for her." Yeah, I know. I'm surprised he's not up in heaven right now arranging for lightning bolts to be fired at my.
Oh.
But be that as it may, let's see what else we have in comments here. And Tabitha Adams makes a good point. Are we overlooking Scotch blends again? Anything from Compass Box would be a good start. And no, we're not trying to overlook Scotch blends. The question was asked, Tabitha, before you jumped into the room, that because since you came in and said hello, that one of the earlier comments had been asked whether Gabrielle had had much experience with single malt scotches. So we are not overlooking blends at all. And there are some really good blends out there. There's a whole world of whiskeys out there to explore. So do you have much? So I'm trying to think here. And Tyrone Coty in Nova Scotia points out Westland for a fantastic American whiskey. And also points out Lot 40 is a good Canadian whiskey. Greg Unrow wants to know, what's your favorite bourbon, Gabrielle? Do you have one yet? Have you figured one out? Or do you have a go-to? Maybe not necessarily a favorite.
I have a go-to. Outside of I'm not going to keep promoting Balcones. They've had enough from us. So, I think another, for me, like a Texas favorite would be Garrison Brothers. They're straight bourbon whiskey. So
yeah,
I'm very, when it comes to bourbon, especially because I keep going back to Texas, I just feel like the bourbons here are just more flavorful, and I love the oaky profile, and it's different. So to answer your question in short, Garrison Brothers.
Yeah, we need to get one of the boys from Garrison Brothers on there sooner or later on the show soon.
Yes, Dan is great. I love Dan.
Yeah, and Greg Unrow points out that if anyone ends up in San Antonio or Austin in the future, you have to do the Whiskey Trail in that area.
Yes, that's my cup, actually, my glass, actually.
Yeah,
Certified Texas
Trail, because there's a bunch of good distilleries down there now.
Yeah.
I know Works is just releasing some whiskey. Ranger Creek in San Antonio is always good for something unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the other distilleries down in San Antonio, Austin way.
Let me think. So there's Treaty Oak, and that's in Dripping Springs. There's a newer one. Are you familiar with Still ATX, Still Austin yet?
Yeah, I just mentioned them, Still Austin.
Okay, I missed that. Sorry.
Stuff. They've reached out to me about talking about some stuff that they're getting ready to release. But,
yeah, they're new. I believe it's coming out next month or in September. But yeah, they're doing some amazing things. But yeah, they're in Austin. There's Iron Root Republic, which we talked about. But
North Fort Worth and Denison, North Flex area.
But the main distillery that I really want to get to, because it's in the hill country and I heard it's beautiful, is that Treaty Oaks Distilling. Sounds like it would be amazing to go to. So it's on my bucket list.
The other one we've talked about, I think it's near Dripping Springs, is Swift. There's a couple down there that's making really good Texas single malt. And I know it's in the Dripping Springs area.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that one, to be honest. But yeah, I'll have to look into that.
There's a really good whiskey trail. And then, of course, you head out. Basically, you can fly into DFW, swing around through the Metroplex, start at Iron Root Republic, and then just work your way down Interstate 35 and hit Balcones and Waco, Austin, and then go all the way down to San Antonio.
Yeah, you could. And even I'm drawing a blank on the whiskey that's in Houston, but Houston has 2 distilleries as well, key ones. I want to say Whitmeyer's. I haven't tried their whiskey yet. And then the other is, I can't think of the other one, but Whitmeyer's is in Houston.
I know the one you're thinking of. It's on the south side of Houston, down near the U of H campus, and I am whiffing on the name of it. I lived in Houston for 5 years and loved it there, but I am stumped on remembering the name of that. Somebody will mention it. Somebody will put it into the chat room area. And Richard Dankovic also says you can get some great Texas barbecue along the way.
Absolutely.
Now, you can make some really good barbecue sauce with bourbon.
Yeah. I haven't tried yet. I'll be honest, I have a confession. I hate cooking. My husband actually, I I am not a Southern belle when it comes to that stuff at all. But he's really into barbecue sauce and making fun creations. So I'll let him experiment with that.
I'm looking at the comments here. Luna Aaron has joined us. Hello and good evening, Barflies and Whiskey Geeks. And Crumpler says, to tell Bart we miss him, but we understand that he has to hide out in the woods regularly to have fuzzy pictures taken of him in the distance.
Yeah.
Hashtag Bigfoot.
Yeah, that's a good call.
And let's see here. Looking through some other questions here. Tom Kimmerer, who's in Lexington. Gabrielle, he missed your intro. I'm assuming you haven't had a chance to interact much with the Black Bourbon Society, Samara Rivers' group. Active, wonderful group of people, but they have chapters all over the country now. Have you had any chance to connect with them at all?
I have not, but I wrote about just what she's doing and has taken the lead in doing in my UpRocks article. I'm inspired by her as well because, again, she is a minority in the industry and she's doing a great job with raising awareness that, hey, there are people of color, there are women of color that enjoy whiskey. So yeah, I'm not associated with the Black Bourbon Society yet, but it's on my to-do.
Yeah, Samara's doing great work. They've got something like 17,000 members, which makes it one of the biggest whiskey clubs around. Also, let's see here. I'm not sure I want to see this one from Luna Aaron at Petehead. Oh, you mean dancing into the room with a feather boa? Hell yes. Okay, that's a little too much information right now. Richard Dankovic, any interactions with Women Who Whiskey, the group? They've also got chapters around the U.S. Any interactions there yet? We can hook you up with those folks too.
Please do, because I feel like the new kid on the block. I hear about these things and I hear about these wonderful groups, but I haven't had the privilege of actually joining or speaking with the different individuals that are overseeing it. So connections, please. I'm open to them.
And Tabitha Adams agrees with you. She's with you, Gabrielle. Hates cooking, loves eating.
Great. Yep, that's me.
And Sam Spears, our buddy just up the road here in New Jersey. County line on the lake in Austin is great barbecue.
Yeah.
It's pretty much impossible to get bad barbecue in Texas, I think.
Very rare. And when it is bad, they shut down fairly quick.
They get shut down is what more like it.
Oh, Mark, Yellow Rose, that's the one.
I was
just said it. Yeah.
Duncan Gray, can you guys give me any insight on Pinhook? Seen them marketing quite a bit recently. Don't know much about them. If you listen to this week's WhiskyCast, we have a full interview with Sean Josephs, who is the co-founder of Pinhook Bourbon. So you want to listen to this week's podcast for that one. So we will move on. You were about
oh, sorry. My plug for that is I also just did a tasting review of their key expressions on UpRocks. So I recommend you check out those tasting expressions and also tune in to WhiskyCast. So yeah, shameless plug.
Now,
go ahead, Scott.
Where do we find UpRocks? Is this a digital?
Yeah, it's digital.
UpRocks?
It's UpRoxx.com.
Okay.
Tabitha Adams is all about increasing the diversity of whiskey drinkers, especially here in the UK. Still seen as mainly a white male pursuit. Yeah. And our pal Dom Roscoe, a very controversial question. In light of all that's happening in the U.S., when I told my friend that Kentucky is so friendly, she said, yes, if you're a white aging heterosexual male, is that changing? And I'm not sure what else, because he said also, and I'm assuming there's a second comment coming there, but yeah, that's pretty much the way it is, Dom. I mean, Gabrielle lives in Texas, but having been in Louisville, yeah. I mean, I can't speak to personal experience, but yeah, I'd say that's pretty much the case. I mean, it's a sad situation still.
Yeah.
I don't know how we get past this whole I don't know how we solve this issue, and I'm not. We can't solve it here among the three of us.
No.
But
it'd be nice if we could.
It'd be nice if we could.
Absolutely.
Hey, y'all behave and love each other, okay? If we could do that, then we could solve all the problems.
That's right. That's right. I agree.
But tell me about your perspective on this, because one of the things you noted in the article, and I want to bring this graphic up again in your UpRocks piece, was that being unique has never fazed me, but I have noticed that my comfort in my own skin has caused others to have reactions. Explain. What have you seen that you notice that, for instance, Scott and I are not going to notice because we are those white, middle-aged, heterosexual males that was referred to earlier. You see it from a different perspective, and we're never going to see it from your perspective. But if you can, share it with, tell us what you see so that maybe we can be more understanding.
Well, I think the biggest thing, and I'll give an example starting with music and get into the whiskey. It's an analogy. So before I got into whiskey, I would cover rock music and I would cover electronic music. And even in those spaces, it would be like, oh my goodness, there's a Black girl here. And I mean, I like Kings of Leon just like the next person. And I just don't think, just even with whiskey, you can't put a color to a hobby or to a spirit or to an interest. Yet that's what some people do. It's stereotypes. Some of it, I think that's where it stems from, like, oh, well, Black people are only supposed to drink, I don't know, gin or gin and juice, something stereotypical, but that's not really the case. And so when you don't fit into a mold, it makes others feel a little uncomfortable.
And Tom Kimmerer points out, Sean and Tia Edwards are the founders of the Fresh Bourbon Distilling Company. They're about to break ground on the ground in their new distillery, which will be the first Black-owned distillery in Lexington. Ooh. I met Sean Edwards back in February at the Beam Institute conference in Lexington and had a chance to chat with him for a couple of minutes. And basically, I've just been waiting for them to break ground on the distillery and want to get him on the show at that point. So that's thanks to Tom for pointing that out. Dom Rascaro points out, a woman after his own heart. And Luna Aaron, Kings of Leon are so great. Tabitha Adams also pointed out, UK barbecue is the worst. I'm so jealous of US barbecue. And we're going to start some trouble here. Crumpler, there's barbecue outside of North Carolina. Yeah, thanks, Crumpler. Yeah, we appreciate that one. Dom Roscoe has a fun question here. Given what's happened with that team in Washington that shall not be named, are you all happy with the name Buffalo Trace?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't have as much of a problem with that one because the trace refers to a river or a stream. And it refers to the trail that the buffalo, it's not a Native American term at all. The trace stems from this whole river that's along the Kentucky River that the buffalo used to follow back in the day, in historic days. So that's more of a natural geography term rather than anything related to the Native American culture. And if I'm wrong about that, I hope somebody will correct me. But I've never heard anybody raise that issue.
Yeah, this is my first time hearing about that too. I think it, like you said, it's more geographical than related to culture.
Paul Finn has a good question for us. Have you tried High West's own whiskey? If so, is it good? I can only get their MGP blends here in the UK. Yeah, I've tried at least their single malt that they released, some of the stuff that they've done at the distillery. And yeah, it's pretty good. It's still kind of young. They're still working on it, but yeah, it's not bad stuff. It's pretty good. It's got some potential to it down the future here. Let's see what else we have. And Dom says, okay, he understands that question. Dom also says we should come to his house for a Kiwi barbecue. Dom lived in New Zealand for a while.
Ooh.
Okay, I want to know what a Kiwi barbecue is. You sticking an emu on the grill there, Dom? There was
I know kiwi is little fruits.
Yeah. Wow. But there was a story out of Australia this week, just a hilarious story about this bar down there where they had these two emus that kept coming in the front door and taking over the bar. A big rope. Emus are sort of like ostriches and just big, dumb birds. And these guys were going in, stealing toast out of the toaster and stuff, and then finally to say emu entrance around the side.
Give them an inch, they'll take a mile, right?
I know, yeah. Let's see, a comment here by Tamitha Adams. Rio by Duran Duran with a Macallan 12. Interesting music and whiskey pairing.
That sounds good.
I remember that song. Oh, God, I have flashbacks of that song because this is one of those songs that I used to have to play in heavy rotation when I was working as a radio DJ in 1983, 1984, when I was finishing up college. Rio by Duran Duran was in heavy rotation, and I was playing that damn song about every 3 hours. I can't get past that song. If I hear that song, it's "My name is Rio." Yeah, I don't know.
Dances on the sand.
Yep. Big dingo on the Barbie, and Duncan Gray can't beat a South African barbecue with rye. That sounds interesting.
I have to agree. I went to South Africa for the first time last year and had all kinds of different barbecue that I have never had. I mean, we had antelope, which was very different, but it was so good.
Mm-hmm.
We should have gotten you down to the James Sedgwick Distillery just outside of Cape Town.
Oh, that would have been so great. I miss traveling so much. I really do.
And his team are making some great whiskeys down there. Dave Kuhn says, I am in trouble with the Emu crowd, or at least the Liberty Mutual fans right now. And Gabrielle, Tom Fredericks points out, Gabrielle, if you can write, you have might. I like that. Hashtag fabric, always encouraging.
Thank you, Tom.
Tom Kimmerer, every major road in central Kentucky was originally a buffalo trace, a trail created by American bison. Has nothing to do with race or even people. The bluegrass had the largest population of bison east of the Mississippi, so Buffalo Trace as a distillery name is perfectly honorable. Thank you for clarifying that.
Very nice.
And Dom has clarified now what a Kiwi barbecue is. I marinate for 3 days and we have hungus. I don't know if that's anything like haggis. We dig a pit, burn a fire, wrap food in leaves, place on stones in the fire, bury and cook for 8 hours. Maori slow cooking. Interesting. Duncan Gray, that's our game exactly. Next time in Baines and 3 Ships whiskey from South Africa, always welcome.
Yay.
Tabitha Adams, ostrich burgers are amazing and so tasty. Haven't had ostrich, but I have had buffalo burgers all the time.
Yeah, same.
Especially down in Houston, there was a little burger shack right into the 610 freeway just down the street from my office, or the first radio station, where I used to do traffic reports. Bubba's Burger Shack. It was this little hole in the wall thing, literally under the freeway bridge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a miracle the health department didn't close these guys down, but did they have good buffalo burgers?
Those are the best places, those hole in the walls, you know?
Yeah. There's and Alexander Clough says, hi, Gabby. Alexander.
Oh, Alex.
PR for Westward. And by the way, I switched over to the Westward Pinot cask, which I think
good.
Was kind enough to send that over originally. So let's see what else we have here for questions. Is Buffalo easily available in the U.S. in the states you are in? Oh, yeah. You go to Whole Foods Market, they have it all the time. But Tabitha points out you can't barbecue a haggis. Want to bet? We can try. You haven't been to Texas. We can barbecue
anything. Exactly. Deep fry and barbecue.
Yep, deep fried barbecue. Yeah, you can try it. And Tabitha says, no, it's illegal.
Oh.
Well, haggis is, but there's a U.S. version of haggis. Are bison burgers better than buffalo burgers? Same thing, different name.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
And Alexander says, awesome, enjoy that Pinot. And yes, I am. And I don't know, did you get this one, Gabby?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, you love it.
I love it. And I wrote about it too. And I love Westward. I'm a little partial, but it's because they make a great whiskey. And that Pinot finish is amazing. So,
they did a stout cask finish too, because they did a stout cask finish last summer that was really good as well, about a year ago. Dave Kuhn points out, if you can deep fry a Twinkie, believe us, we can ruin anything.
That's a good one.
And Tabitha points out haggis is actually illegal in the States, weirdly enough. It's illegal to import into the U.S. because of the use of the sheep's intestine as the lining, but they have figured out methods around that to make a U.S. legal haggis that's an approximation. We also have this thing referred to as a vegetarian haggis, and I have no idea what the hell that thing is.
What would be? What's the purpose of that?
Yeah, that's all the fun out of it. And Bill Ricker, our anal retentive colleague from the Boston area, points out, if I remember correctly, the American buffalo is not biologically a buffalo, but is actually a bison, hence the confusion. Okay, and Graham Fraser points out, yep, deep-fried Mars bars invented in Scotland. So, yeah, y'all can't complain about anything we screw up over here if you guys can deep-fry Mars bars.
Well, I think fish and chips are that's a well-known dish in the UK as well that's fried. So,
Duncan Gray wants to know if the Westward Pinot cask is better than a long row Pinot with a big grin. I don't know, because I haven't tasted a long row Pinot finish in a while. I'm gonna have to taste them head to head.
Yeah, me too, because I can't answer that one.
I haven't had any of the Westward stuff yet, so I need to put that on my list.
Alexandra, you know where to reach Scott. Do you want to give her the email address again?
Oh, yeah. Scotch Test Dummies @gmail.com.
We should be able to take care of that. And Greg Unrau, who lives in Calgary, Alberta, moose is better than all of them. And yeah, I can't argue with that. Having lived in Alaska for 7 years and gotten to eat more than my share of moose meat, oh yeah. You try moose chili, moose gumbo is amazing.
Moose gumbo.
Moose gumbo is amazing. And I think you'll be hearing from Alexandra. She got the message.
Nice.
Crumpler just cracked open the George Dickel Bottle and Bond 11-year-old, and it is much better than last year's 13, in his not so humble opinion. I think the two compared pretty well. Did you guys get to try those?
No.
The 13, yes, I have not seen or had the 11 yet. I loved the 13.
Yeah. And Paul Finn says he loves veggie haggis. Okay. Luna, deep fried Snickers is much nicer, actually. And Tabitha says, but do you import live wild haggis? It's known that they have longer so they can run around mountaintops easily. Tabitha, that comment wins the night. Thank you for playing. Graham Fraser, you need to come to the Calgary Stampede some year. They deep fry everything, including crickets. I am not going to ever tell anybody to try the Rocky Mountain oysters if you go out to the western.
No, those are a must try.
You've tried them?
Oh yeah, I've had them several. I grew up on those annually. Well, I didn't. Yeah, it's not like I was fed those daily. Once a year, there was an annual Rocky Mountain oyster fry and lamb fry. It's good.
You want to explain what those are? Because I think Gabrielle's got this questioning look on her face because oysters they don't do in Texas.
I did not have a good poker face. I was trying, but yeah.
Rocky Mountain oysters are bull testicles.
Oh.
Yeah. And then there's also lamb testicles you can get as well. They're deep fried usually, and you serve them with like a cocktail sauce, like a shrimp cocktail sauce. It's very good, actually.
Pretty good?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah, I had no clue. I was just like, okay, I'll just smile and nod. I'm glad you clarified that.
And let's see here. Crumpler goes, moose gumbo sounds like a euphemism. No, it's actually real. You just throw some moose meat in there, ground up. And Luna Aaron, Tabitha Adams, I really have to try that. Maybe they are easier to catch then. So cheeky, those haggis creatures.
Cheeky. I love it.
Let's see here. Dave Kuhn, what is the most consistent Scotch distillery, most consistent bourbon distillery in terms of never disappointing? Oh, that's a tough question. You guys got on that one?
I can't answer the Scotch one. We already know that. But bourbon, let me think. Let me think on that one. Now
I mean,
I gotta look at my stats.
I mean, there'd be several. There's several that just consistently put out good stuff. It kind of depends. If you're looking for a consistent peat that's good, Ardbeg is probably leads the list. I'd tend towards sherried scotches. I'd say Macallan is getting pricey, but it's good whiskey. Consistently good. Glendronach and Glengoyne and Glenfarclas, although at the same time as well. Just off the top of my head, Glenfiddich, Glenmorangie, Balvenie. There's a lot.
Yeah, the Scotch distilleries are generally pretty consistent. It's hard.
Yeah.
And Tabitha Adams, haggis creatures are vicious creatures, but you can befriend them with a saucer of iron brew. For the uninitiated, iron brew is this Scottish orange soda that is, oh God, it makes you it makes you feel almost diabetic. There's so much sugar in that thing.
Yeah, it's an energy drink. And I think if I remember right, it's got a secret ingredient in it that they don't reveal what it is. It would never pass in the United States because they can't keep anything secret. But
I can get iron brew here locally. There's a little British.
Oh, really?
British goods shop in Haddonfield, just like a downtown Haddonfield, where they do sell iron brew, along with the real Cadbury's Dairy Milk chocolate bars imported from the UK, not the cheap imitation Hershey's crap that passes for dairy milk over here. And Tabitha points out iron brew is made from girders. Oh God. Or black bear meat ground with a bit of cow fat makes fantastic burgers. Oh, God. Yeah, we are going going downhill here.
There's a good question by Paul Finn.
Which one? What do you think about virtual distillery tours?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a bit, because that's all we're getting these days for the most part. There are some that are opening up, but Paul did the Ratsey one virtually. It was a great idea in lockdown that came with 7 samples and a Zoom tour. That's a hell of a virtual. That's not quite a virtual tasting. That's a tasting with a virtual tour, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's amazing. I just had a great virtual tour about 2 weeks ago with this brand, 291 out of Colorado. It was my first time to actually try their bourbon. Love it. He actually used to be a fashion photographer before he became a distiller. So he has a really cool story, and the actual distillery is really cool. And yeah, I love it. I love the whiskey too. Michael
Myers is doing some really cool stuff. We had him on the show a couple of years ago.
Oh, okay.
And Greg's Whiskey Guide on Consistency, and Greg Serafian in Paris. He awarded on his website the Japanese Yoichi Distillery as his distillery of the decade for 2003 to 2013, as he tried a lot of them for quality and, for instance, high consistency over time. And Pete Head, when you order an iron brew, you get an appointment for the. Okay. Tabitha points out, with the preponderance of VR technology, distilleries could do an immersive virtual tour. That would be a cool idea. I've seen them before in the distillery virtual tours. I get a headache watching with those crazy goggles that you put over your face.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Duncan Gray did a Borders virtual tour recently. They're doing good things. Is that an Iron Root Republic you're pouring, Scott?
Yes. Yeah, I decided to stay in Texas. So Yay. Icarus. Iron Root Icarus.
Nice.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And Graham Fraser says, see, Gabrielle, so many good scotches to point out.
Yes, I have a list actually now.
Macallan is the Marshall amplifier of Scotch. Paying for a name, Dave Kuhn says. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it is fair to say that a lot of Macallan is somewhat overhyped. I would say the new distillery has become known as Malt Disney World in Speyside because of the Disneyification of the place. Greg Serafian wants to know if Iron Brew resembles in any way to Fanta Orange. Yeah, on steroids. Balvenie is greater than Macallan, according to Dave Kuhn. Can't argue with that one.
Oh, okay.
And Luna points out to Greg, I did not like Iron Brew. Actually, really disgusting. Luna says, would love to stay in Texas whiskey-wise, but hard to come by in Europe. Do you have any info if that will change? I know Balcones is available in Europe. Mm-hmm. Not sure about the other Texas whiskeys, but Gabby, do you know anything about anybody else planning exports?
They're really the only ones that I personally know of for sure know that they ship to Europe, and they have. Yeah, I don't know any others. I'm trying to think, but I don't. Mm-mm.
Iron Root was working with Berry Brothers and Rudd, and they actually did a special bottling. It was Iron Root, Berry Brothers and Rudd. Basically, had Iron Root do a small batch for them. They labeled it Berry Brothers and Rudd from Iron Root, Republic, Texas, USA.
It was the legation bourbon.
Yeah,
Berry Brothers and Rudd on St. James's Place in London. Mm-hmm. Upstairs from Berry Brothers and Rudd was the original Texas embassy back when Texas was an independent country briefly.
Yep, that's right.
Oh,
there was above Berry Brothers and Rudd.
Yeah.
So that's the story behind that. And Berry Brothers and Rudd picked Iron Root Republic to do the whiskey for them several years ago.
Yeah. But I think they were working with them as well to try to get just some of their standalone bottlings over there as well. And I don't know if they are or not yet, but.
Tom Fredericks up in Canada, ARS, the Association of Halifax Regional Scotch Enthusiasts. Oh, there's the puppy.
Right. I had the door mostly shut. They finally figured it out.
What's her name?
This is Ellie.
Hi, Ellie.
Ellie, tell hi. Okay.
I have Bear laying here at my feet, and I will switch the camera for just a second. Just because, well, what the hell? It's Friday afternoon. Who cares? Let's, Bear's laying on the floor like a knucklehead here.
Aww.
So let me switch the camera back, and so there's Bear lying on the floor. He's been a good boy and hasn't barked once just because no squirrels have come to the front door.
Yeah, don't say that too loud.
And Luna points out Balcones is available in the UK, but others never seen much. And Greg said, got to find this one indeed, Scotch Test Dummies. I remember you said it. I even saw the bottle there, the Texas Legation Edition. Crumpler says, wishes he could get Iron Root in Virginia, bleeping state-controlled stores here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Tabitha, when I was in Edinburgh for Hogmanay a few years back on New Year's Eve, we invented a cocktail of champagne and Iron Brew. We named it Bampain. A Bam is a Scottish term for an undesirable type person like a Ned or a Chav. Okay. And Grant Fraser, what's Ellie's favorite whiskey, Scott? What if she knows when you stick a glass in front of her face?
I don't know. I don't know that she has one. No, she's not old enough.
Well, she's 3 at least, right?
No, she's only probably right about just over 1.
Okay, so she is underage. 7 years is 1. It should be like 14. Okay. Dave Kuhn, is Balcones Blue similar to Jimmy Red Corn? Well, only in the sense that they're regional varieties, because blue corn is a regional variety that's grown in the Southwest, and Jimmy Red Corn, which the folks at Highwire Distilling have become sort of famous for in South Carolina, is grown in the Charleston area and the islands around Charleston. And that's a South Carolina specific variety of corn that's an heirloom corn. Blue corn is southwestern, the Mexico region, northern Mexico. That's where you get blue corn. So it's a regional variety, so it's similar in that point of view. Let's see here. Paul Finn says, where I live in England, there's more iron brew on the shelves than Coke. We have a high percentage of Scots. Tom Kimmerer, a big part of a distillery tour is the smell and atmosphere, which changes constantly as you move through the tour. A virtual tour can't replicate the real experience. Many of our distilleries are still open for limited audience tours. I was talking earlier today with Kyle Henderson of Angel's Envy because somebody asked earlier about the new Angel's Envy 10th anniversary Mizunara cask finish. I tasted that one last night, and I will have my tasting notes for it on the show this weekend. I loved that one. And it's the first American whiskey that's been done in Mizunara oak, as far as anybody knows. Mm-hmm. But they are still not open for tours yet. Their gift shop is open. Their visitor center is open, but they're trying to keep the production separate from the tours. And because a lot of the smaller distilleries in Kentucky still have fairly hands-on tours where you're getting up real close to the distillers, they want to keep them separate to keep everybody safe. Yeah. So
I have to agree with Tom, though. I mean, unfortunately, the pandemic has really put a wrench in all of our plans, but I'll take what I can get. If it's only a virtual tour for now, then I will take it.
I know I was talking with one distiller over the last couple of days where he mentioned that, or with one distillery executive on the phone the other day, where he mentioned that he had been able to do tastings and virtual events with Zoom in Canada, the UK, and in the US in the space of 24 hours, and his travel budget was $0.
Yeah.
And I think that may be the way we start moving towards a lot of these events, because if you can keep your master distiller or blender in one or your head blender or head distiller in one location and have them reaching out to folks in different locations,
right,
a lot more efficient and a lot cheaper than flying them all over the country and having them away from the distillery or flying them around the world.
Yeah, I agree. But I want to go in person.
I know. We all do. Graham Fraser points out many more distilleries are reopening in Scotland. Thankfully, safety first, though. Tabitha, our bourbon distillery is making much of terroir. It's becoming a thing in Scotch and especially in Irish whiskey, and we know that from especially the Waterford folks. Unless you're doing the heirloom corn styles, like, for instance, Jephthah Creed with its Bloody Butcher corn in its bourbon, I think it's hard to really get terroir into a bourbon just because of the because you're pulling in corn from all over the place. Let's see here. Tom Kimmerer points out we need smell-o-vision for virtual tours. Yep, I like that idea.
Me too.
Dave Kuhn says not as exciting as Jim McEwen's helicopter. There was this documentary film that had Jim in it a while back where he lands at the distillery in Brookladdy in a helicopter for a tour. Tom Fredericks Ars has done 18 Zoom sessions, access to industry leaders they wouldn't have otherwise had access to. And being based in Nova Scotia, yeah. Other than Alan Winchester, who goes to the New Brunswick Spirits Festival in Fredericton every year, you're generally not going to get a lot of folks flying into Nova Scotia, but these Zoom tastings makes it possible for people in smaller towns and smaller regions that don't have a major metropolitan area nearby to get access to folks like Alan Winchester and Richard Patterson and John Glazer and a lot of these folks.
Right.
What's an ARS?
ARS is the Association of Halifax Regional Scotch Enthusiasts. ARS is the acronym. It is also the British term for yeah, you get it. They refer to themselves as the Art Holes. And to be honest, they are our reigning Whiskey Club of the Month until this weekend, because we will be naming our August Whiskey Club of the Month on the show this weekend. Yeah. So nice. Guys at ARS will be getting 24 WhiskyCast Glencairn glasses to use at their club tastings when they can resume the in-person tastings right now. Greg says, don't get me started about terroir again. Well, Greg is in France, and they believe that wine has the exclusive rights on terroir. Tabitha Adams says to Luna, who is asking about the general taste of a Mizunara cask, it reminds me of the smell of tatami mats. That probably doesn't help. And Tabitha points out, actually it does. As a karate girl, I know the smell.
Oh.
To be honest, I got a lot of incense and some pine needles on the aroma on that Angel's Envy Mizunara finish. So that may be a good way to describe it. Let's see here. Well, we've asked about Scott's favorite ever dram and Gabrielle's, and we haven't gotten there. Greg points out complex, half smoky with an incense to sandalwood, half tied oak. And this is an interesting question from Dave Kuhn. Is there a major negative association with MGP, or is that only for the elitists of us? So your takes on this one, you two?
Ooh.
MGP does some good stuff. Now a lot of people do get it. Some people, I would say, overprice the liquid that they get from MGP. I think that's some new younger distilleries buy from MGP before they can get their stuff going. Right. It's kind of a necessary evil as far as what pricing do they come in at. I think point blank, though, when you look at it, MGP does some good whiskeys. There's a lot. Of course, there's a lot of different people out there buying it. Don't be afraid to try it. Even though myself, if it's a whiskey I haven't seen, or if I know it's a new distillery and it's $80, I'm probably not buying it. I mean, I think they price themselves out of a lot of the market by doing that. If they can buy that and they can keep it, I mean, who knows what cost they have going into it. If it's a $20 to $30, maybe $40 bottle in that range, I'm probably looking at it more than I am an $80 bottle. I think people have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, yep. I agree with you on that. I forgot who actually just wrote that. Oh, Dave. To Dave's point, there are elitists, yes, but I mean, you just have to keep an open mind. I don't think it should matter. I mean, this is just coming from me being new age, I guess. But I don't really think you should dictate what whiskey tastes better than others based off of where it comes from.
My take on this is simple. MGP makes good juice. And I shouldn't use that term juice because that drives some people nuts too. But I think MGP makes really good whiskey. What happens is a lot of the time you get these people who buy a bunch of casks from MGP and then try to finish them in something to make it taste different. And they screw it up.
Yeah.
They screw it up. And then MGP gets a bad reputation because they've been making whiskey for 150 years at MGP. They know how to make whiskey properly because that place was the Seagram's distillery before it went through, changed a few hands over the years. And they've been distilling there for 150 years. They know how to make good whiskey, and they do make good whiskey. But then people get this wild ass idea about putting it into different casks and finishing it or trying to put their own spin on it, and they screw it up, and then MGP gets a bad reputation.
Yeah, I agree.
And Richard says, I meant to say Kent Moore. Okay, these things keep scrolling down. Richard says, for not in the inner circle, can you explain MGP and its connotations? Sure. MGP is Midwest Grain Products, and it's MGP ingredients. They bought about 7 or 8 years ago what was originally for many years known as the Seagram's Distillery in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. And this was the distillery that made a lot of the whiskey that went into Seagram's whiskeys over the years, Seagram's Seven Crowns, Seagram's Gold, a lot of the Seagram's expressions. And Pernod Ricard almost shut the place down about 10 years ago because it was surplus to their needs. It's gone through some hands, but essentially MGP has, in the last couple of years, started bottling its own brands. George Remus is the most widely known of them. They do have Eight and Sand. There's also one they sell in Indiana exclusively that's named for, well, let me see if I've got it handy here, and I don't have it where I can see it. It was named after the creek in Lawrenceville, Indiana, that is literally about 5 miles from the Ohio River, just outside of Cincinnati. And what they do now is sell a lot of bulk whiskey. They sell essentially they produce whiskey in tanker-sized amounts, essentially, and they will sell it. For instance, they supply some to High West. They supply all of Templeton Rye's whiskey. They supply to basically anybody that wants to put their own brand on it, and they sell it by the barrel or by the tanker load or by the long-term contracts. For instance, Old Elk Bourbon is based in Colorado, but Greg Metz was the master distiller at MGP for years. His final few years, he was distilling the Old Elk recipe and then went to work for Old Elk after he retired. So that's where their recipe came from. But they distill these probably 15 to 20 different mash bills. They're most well known for their 95% rye, 5% malted barley recipe that goes into both Bullet rye and the George Dickel rye for Diageo. The difference is that the Dickel rye gets the Lincoln County process of charcoal filtering. Mm-hmm. So they sell to a lot of people, and some people take their whiskey and bottle it as is, and it's generally good whiskey. Some people put it into finishing casks or do their own blends, and they screw it up. That's basically the way to say that essentially you're going to get good whiskey out of MGP. It depends on what they've done to it after it left Lawrenceburg. That makes the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one of the neat things, though, too, is from what I understand, MGP, if I start a new distillery and it's going to be 5 years before I can start selling my stuff, so I can go to MGP or you can kind of order up a mash bill, and you can say, I want something that's 70% corn, 10% rye, and 30% barley, and they'll distill it, or they already have it, and people can buy kind of a mash bill type, White Dog unaged spirit from them already.
Yeah, you can buy mature whiskey, or you can buy your own White Dog and mature it yourself in your own bonded warehouse. And they've got all these different mash bills. You can say, I want a high rye 7 or 8 year old whiskey, and if they've got it in stock, they'll sell it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you can bottle it under your own name, and some folks do. And just trying to go here, it's not like the Jameson and the old bottlers and bonders, Richard. It's more like those folks were selling the same whiskey, but it was coming out of the barrel, and they would ship the barrel to a bonder or to a retailer in Ireland. And you would take your own jug and fill it from the cask at the grocery store or whatever. That's in this case, they're not selling it under their own. The store is not selling it under its own name. It's Jameson whiskey, but you're filling it straight from the cask right now. Dave Kuhn points out for the community folks out there and the community watchers, if it's good enough for Ron Swanson and Leslie Nope, it's good enough for us. Ron Swanson for president. Ron Swanson, of course, is the legendary Nick Offerman, who has this bottle of Lafroig that's over my shoulder now, the Offerman edition Lafroig, and managed to feature that there. Dave Kuhn, I'm going to correct you on this one because he was surprised Angel's Envy was MGP. Angel's Envy rye is probably his favorite rye. The Angel's Envy bourbon, you got to look at this carefully because if it says Kentucky on there, which it does in the case of the Angel's Envy bourbons, it's coming from Kentucky. And only if you see an Angel's Envy straight rye, if it doesn't list the state, then it's coming from Indiana. But if it says Angel's Envy Kentucky rye, and I haven't looked up the Angel's Envy rye to see whether it says Kentucky, I want to correct you on that because it may not be Angel's Envy rye coming from MGP. So I'm just sort of looking at this off the top of my head right now. Dave Kuhn says, Lafroig, blasphemy, you're right. Lagavulin. My mistake. I said, sorry, my bad on that one. Tor Christensen in Norway points out that, going to MGP is a great idea to get the cash flow going earlier while waiting for casks to mature. Yes, that is how they do it. They, if you don't want to make gin or vodka, and I can agree with that, you need to have some whiskey. So you go to MGP and buy the whiskey.
Yeah. I think it comes down to transparency, though, too, and people have gotten in trouble in the past because they tried to claim it was their whiskey through whatever wordage on the label. They got called out and had to get fixed. A lot of times, though, and people will be surprised, I think, how many whiskeys are coming from MGP and they're on another label or a different name on the label. And what you have to do is go to the back of the label usually and look, and it's going to tell you where it was distilled and where it was bottled at, something along those lines. So you might see something, you think it's from Kentucky or Tennessee, and then you look and you see, oh, it's distilled in Indiana. Then it's a MGP.
If you don't see Kentucky or Indiana or a state on the front label, if it just says such and such straight bourbon, look at the back, because usually in little tiny type, if they're following the instructions and the TTB label inspectors have been doing their job and making sure it's on there, it should say the state it's distilled in if it's a different state from where it's bottled.
Yeah.
For instance, Templeton Rye got sued over this a few years ago. Now their bottles all say distilled in Indiana.
Yeah.
This one. Yeah. Luna Aaron. Oh, my, bourbon and rye in the U.S. can be confusing. And Greg, hell yeah, Luna Aaron. Yep. Federal rules concerning bourbon and rye. This is confusing. Here's the basic rule. You can make bourbon whiskey and rye whiskey in any U.S. state. The difference is that bourbon has to be 51% corn, rye whiskey has to be 51% rye. You can only list the state on there as a Kentucky bourbon or a Kentucky rye, for instance, if it was mashed, fermented, distilled, and matured all within the same state. And if the bottler is in a different state, for instance, if you distill it in Indiana at MGP, then bottle it in Bardstown at Strong Spirits, which does a lot of the bottling for these independent bottlers, you can say bottled by such and such, Bardstown, Kentucky, but you got to say distilled in Indiana on the back label or somewhere on the label. So that's how you can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crumpler goes, I love the misleading marketing about Great Grandpappy's recipe when I know it's MGP. We're not talking about Pappy Van Winkle here. Greg, hard to tell where Michter's sourced his great old stuff, though, for instance. You're right. It is hard to tell, but it is from someplace in Kentucky. There are distilleries in the past that don't sell whiskey now in bulk that used to. Back when it was harder to sell bourbon on the market, it was easier to go to one of the big boys and buy some bourbon, bulk bourbon from them. Tom Kimmerer says some of the Kentucky startups sell white goods until their bourbon matures. New Riff makes a wonderful Kentucky gin using juniper and herbs collected in Kentucky. If you are going to be a Kentucky distillery, I think this is a more honest way of doing business than rebranding MGP. Now, we should note that New Riff did rebrand MGP for a while under the OKI brand for Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana. They just sold that brand to some guys in Kentucky, the guys who actually founded the George Remus brand a few years ago, then sold that one to MGP. So it's this big incestuous little family thing. And Ellie has come back to visit us.
She's not listening.
I love it. She's like, hey, everybody.
Paul Finn, great question here. Is it true that bourbon cannot contain caramel? Wish that was a rule in Scotland. If it's straight bourbon, no. If it's labeled as bourbon whiskey, technically it can contain up to 2.5% of colorings or flavorings by volume. Now, bourbon isn't supposed to, officially. But if it says straight bourbon, that's your best bet that there's nothing added to it. Bourbon whiskey is not supposed to have colorings added to it, but you never quite know.
See, I'm learning all the time, too, because I never knew that.
Yeah.
Tabitha Adams, I'm not keen on rye, but I love corn whiskey. Even mellow corn is delicious, considering how cheap it is. I adore the packaging, too. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with mellow corn. It's a great whiskey. Greg said, would you recommend Bullet Rye? Yeah, Bullet Rye is not a bad whiskey. It's that MGP 95.5 mash bill, and they don't screw with it.
Right.
Once it gets to the Bullet folks, they don't screw around with it. They bottle it straight, and yeah, it's a good whiskey.
It is. I actually use it for cocktails. So yeah, I like Bullet.
Aaron, I prefer rye to bourbon, not as sweet for my palate. And the Kuhn Angel's Envy Rye, I call breakfast whiskey. It's like a vanilla cinnamon roll.
Nice.
Oh, yeah, that I can see that.
A breakfast whiskey. Nice. Haven't did that yet.
My breakfast whiskey, though, is what we refer to around here as 10 a.m. Envy smoked maple. Because it's a flavored whiskey. It's one of the few I actually like, but it tastes like pancakes and sausage. And that's when we pull out on Christmas morning, when everybody's sitting around the couch, sitting around in the living room. We're opening gifts. Instead of mimosas, it's 10 a.m. Angel's Envy smoked maple, because it's just like pancakes, bacon, and sausage.
Yum.
Mimosa, that's what I was trying to remember a little bit ago when the Iron Brew and Champagne cocktail came up. I was trying to remember mimosa. So,
and our pal Tyrone points out Ireland has a bunch of new distilleries that use Cooley product. Most don't disclose it. Yeah, they do use Cooley product from distilled back in the day when it was before Beam Suntory bought it. Single malts you'll also find will come from Bushmills, and they don't disclose that either in Ireland, because Bushmills was doing the single malts in Ireland. Even Middleton doesn't do single malts. Bushmills was doing the only single malts in Ireland until Cooley came along. And Greg points out 11Z's is another opportunity to try something drammy, only in France. Tor Christensen, breakfast whiskey, yep, thumbs up there.
Yeah.
Well, 11Z's comes after second breakfast.
Yep, I hear that. And of course, Tabitha, it's 5 p.m. in the world somewhere whenever you're drinking whiskey, of course. Absolutely to that. Breakfast whiskey, Tom Kimmerer points out, is the best line of the evening.
I agree. I like that term. Yep.
And Crumpler is pointing out he's clutching his pearls. Flavored whiskey. Yeah, I get your point. This is the one flavored whiskey I like. The Knob Creek smoked maple. Yeah, just because, I love bacon. I love sausage. I love pancakes. It's a trip to the IHOP without actually having to go sit in the IHOP. And with that, Dave Kuhn points out, WhiskyCast Live Happy Hour Friday night is the best. And with that, I want to thank our guests tonight, Gabrielle Pharms. You can find her at, give us the website, Gabby.
www.gabbynicki.com.
And Scott, tell us once again about the auction on Sunday.
Sunday, 1:00 p.m. Central Time. Tune in to Scotch Test Dummies YouTube channel. Bart and I will be running a fundraiser and auctioning off several items to help support Brett, a.k.a. Scotch Trooper, who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer a couple months ago. He's been undergoing treatment, and just trying to help him out a little bit.
And thank you for that. And once again, one of the items up for auction is a print from the WhiskyCast Art of Whiskey Gallery. Any print, any size you want. If you want a big honking print to hang in your gallery of your office building or whatever, you want a 30 by 40 inch print or even bigger, hell, I'll make it for you. We'll get it done if we can raise some money for Brett, because got to support a fellow whiskey lover and a fellow photographer. Now, coming up on our Whiskey Wednesday webcast this week, we will have Tom Kimmerer. You've seen his comments in the last hour or so here on the show. Tom is a tree scientist based in Lexington and knows, well, basically, Tom's forgotten more about wood than most of us know. And he's going to share his questions and his knowledge with us and answer your questions for the entire hour on Wednesday during the Whiskey Wednesday webcast. Don't forget the podcast coming up this weekend. We'll be talking about all sorts of stuff. We'll have the week's news for you. I will have my tasting notes for that Angel's Envy Mizunara cask finish bourbon. I want to thank once again Scott Brunow of the Scotch Test Dummies and Gabrielle Pharms of GabbyNicki.com. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
And thanks for joining us, guys. Let me just say goodbye to everybody here. Thanks for playing. Enjoy yourselves this weekend. Be safe. Hey, if you're going out in public, I know they're uncomfortable, but wear the damn mask, okay? It's the only way we are going to get through this mess and get to the point where we can all actually enjoy whiskey and be able to get together once again in public together. Until we meet again, I'm Mark Gillespie. Have yourselves a great weekend, and just please be safe, everybody. Good night, y'all.